Is this the end of democracy as we know it? Is fascism once again on the rise? You may have noticed, but the world is kind of crazy these days. The UK is leaving the European Union, apparently. The US elected a game show host president, and Europe's kind of just all over the place. Two words explain it all: national populism. That's also the title of a book out today by Roger Eatwell and Matthew Goodwin, and in it they kind of outline their two broad arguments, which are firstly that national populism is a serious force that has to be dealt with and understood, and the second is that it's here to stay. Basically, it has long-term lasting consequences and we should get used to it. What is national populism? National populism is the term the authors give to the current wave of mostly right-wing movements we're seeing across the West, which prioritise the culture and interests of the nation ahead of transnational organisations and distant political elites, and which capitalises on people's apathy and decreasing loyalty to mainstream political parties, a shared feeling of having lost one's voice in the national conversation, and fears of the destruction of the national group, identity and traditions through immigration and rapid ethnic change. The authors use the term national populism rather than populist nationalism because it emphasises the movement's shared populist nature. While it's often seen as simply a style or a way of doing politics, populism is more like a thin ideology with three core themes. It appeals to a popular will, promises to defend ordinary people, and opposes corrupt and distant elites. But populism needs more than that. It has to combine with another ideology in order to develop a full range of social and economic policies. One of the problems that we're having is that many people just dismiss these movements as fascist. But populism and fascism are two very different, distinct ideologies. As I just mentioned, populism appeals to a popular will, ordinary people, and is against corrupt and distant elites, while fascism promises a holistic nation, arguing that their country has deep ethnic and even spiritual roots which demand loyalty and must be protected at all costs. It also promises to create a new man and is for a third-way society, an authoritarian third-way society, a state-led authoritarian third-way society in between socialism and capitalism. So as you can see, Trump, Le Pen and Brexit fall firmly on one side of this. They do not advocate for the end to democratic elections or for dictatorship. In chapter 1, the authors discuss the myths around national populism. Myth 1. National populism only appeals to angry old white men who will soon die and be replaced by a generation of tolerant, woke millennials. In Britain, around 2/5 of those aged between 18 and 34 supported Brexit. The League in Italy draws support from the young who see immigration as a key issue. The Alternative for Germany appeals most strongly to people aged between 25 and 50. Trump won around 28% of the Latino vote, while 1 in 3 black, Asian and minority ethnic voters supported Brexit. Half of white women voted for Trump, while half of women overall backed Brexit. National populists enjoy diverse support, and with the rise of the more conservative Generation Z, the fact that we get more conservative as we age, and the fact that we're living longer, these voters aren't going anywhere. Myth 2. All of this is economic, just simply the result of the 2008 financial crash and the Great Recession. But while these crises did create more room for national populists, they simply deepened societal divides which existed long before. The myth also ignores the fact that populists are doing well in well-off countries like Austria and Switzerland, the fact that economic hardship was a better predictor for support for Hillary Clinton than it was for Donald Trump, and the fact that Brexit was cheered on by depressed northern industrial towns and affluent conservative counties alike. Myth 3. The stupid national populist voter. Education is a key divide, and while it's true that people without degrees are more likely to vote for populists, many finished high school, went to college, do have a degree, or pursued education through channels other than highly expensive universities. And not having a degree is by no means a symbol of failure. Education is key because it shapes our values and worldview. Those who've gone to college are more culturally liberal, those who haven't, more socially conservative. There are lots of other mini-myths as well, that these are all just protest votes, that people are being misled by fake news and a big red bus, or that Cambridge Analytica or the Russians did it. But the truth is that national populists are supported by a broad, diverse coalition of people with strong concerns and shared values. The bulk of the book is made up of the author's central thesis, the 4 key themes that explain the success of national populists: distrust, destruction, deprivation, and de-alignment. A strong distrust of established political and economic elites has fueled a sense among large numbers of citizens that they no longer have a voice in their national conversation. After the Second World War, partly out of fear that democracies could elect fascists, power began to steadily aid flow away from sovereign states and towards distant, unelected transnational organisations like the UN, WTO and the EU, designed to foster international peace and promote economic growth. The European Union, for example, started as a simple economic partnership but has evolved into a political union which only seeks closer and closer social, political and economic integration, much of which has been undertaken without democratic consent, by bureaucrats increasingly unaccountable and distant from regular people in democratic nations. This one seems fairly simple. National populists draw on fears of the destruction of the national group's historic identity and established ways of life, through high levels of immigration and hyper-ethnic change. This kind of topic is kind of difficult and awkward to talk about, but the authors are very neutral, fair and reasonable, as you'd expect, just using the data and statistics to lay out the reasons why this is such a problem and why people have legitimate concerns, because they are legitimate concerns. These are real changes really happening in the world to ordinary people, and we're not going to get anywhere if we just label everyone who brings them up as a racist. The bridge between culture and economics is what the authors refer to as relative deprivation, the sense that you're doing worse off relative to other people in society, that others, such as immigrants or the rich, are given higher priority by governments than you. It's not just about rising inequality and job losses, nor is it just about fears around immigration. Relative deprivation is about people's subjective perceptions about how their own position and that of their wider group is changing compared to others in society, which creates a profound sense of social, political and cultural loss, and it affects the poor, the young and some of the middle class. This chapter was more difficult for me to get through just because I don't know as much about economics as I really should, and I'm terrible with maths, but it was still engaging and really interesting to read, the way that they tell the story behind the statistics. The final D, the biggest D you could say, is de-alignment. That refers to the weakening political bonds of allegiance between parties and the people. The authors discuss the culture war, which has been raging beneath the surface of party politics for the past 50 years or so, between two different sets of competing values. To give you a brief summary, as we go through the last century, we move from the greatest and silent generations, who lived through world wars and mass social and economic turmoil, to the post-war baby boomers, who didn't have to worry as much about basic physical and economic security, leading many of these culturally liberal voters to adopt post-material values like equality and self-expression, and to support culturally liberal movements like sexual liberation and opposition to the Vietnam War. This liberalising movement is known as the Silent Revolution, but a silent counter-revolution, led by a silent majority of social conservatives concerned with protecting their traditions and way of life, sprung up around the 1970s. It can be seen in movements like the Moral Majority, Pat Buchanan's presidential campaign, and various European populists. These divides have erupted onto the scene recently and represent a shift in political fault lines from the older economic arguments around economic redistribution to newer arguments around immigration, national identity and security. A change in political priorities, parties too slow to adapt, weakening party allegiances, far fewer people voting than ever before, and much higher political volatility, people willing to switch their vote from one election to the next. This all feeds into de-alignment, and this further feeds national populism. So, the authors have laid out the facts and statistics, they've dispelled the myths and rumours around national populism, and they've explained that Matteo Salvini, Trump, Brexit, Marine Le Pen, these cannot be explained by short-term causes alone. What happens now? Where do we go from here? The authors refer to this as post-populism, the dawning of an era in which people will be able to evaluate whether or not voting for populists has made a tangible difference to their lives. So, that was National Populism, the Revolt Against Liberal Democracy. It's a really good book, I definitely recommend picking it up. Really engaging, really interesting, very fact and data driven, but again, well written so that you're very engaged, and the stories that they tell, like I said, the rise of capitalism, that kind of thing, it's just incredibly interesting. If you want to know why the world is how it is at the moment, I definitely recommend picking it up. Like I said, it's out today. I'm not being paid by the authors or by Penguin or anything, or by Putin, or by Soros, or anyone to make this. I just really like the book and I really wanted to read it. So yeah, let me know what you thought of this video, what you think of the book if you read it. 4Ds, can we solve them? Distrust, deprivation, destruction and de-alignment. Are they real? Do you think this is all a load of rubbish and that it's just, a big red bus confused some old people and that was it? But yeah, like, comment, subscribe, let me know what you thought, and yeah. Putin, where's my money? The myth also... The globalists, they don't want me to speak.